In 1996, Intel began the process of identifying a location to build its first plant in Latin America. The US-based manufacturer of microprocessors had plans to build a plant that would serve as its launching pad to distribute its products throughout Latin America. Capital investment for the project was approximately $500 million, and the expected number of jobs was to rise to 3,000. After an initial round of due diligence, Intel's site selection team arrived at a shortlist comprised of Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. Soon thereafter, however, Costa Rica's economic development team was able to convince Intel to add its name to the list of potential locations. Although Costa Rica was added to the list, it was clearly the least likely country to win the project. After Intel changed its plans to include a stop to Costa Rica on its way to Brazil, the company's site selection team embarked on its journey to visit the 4 potential sites. The 4-stop tour helped Intel put together a list of positives and negatives for each country. The list of pros and cons read as follows. Costa Rica, throughout its history and at the time that they were visiting in 1996, had demonstrated that its political and economic situation was more than stable. This was of great comfort to Intel. In addition to the political and economic stability, the economic development team in Costa Rica had demonstrated a significant amount of interest in having Intel come to Costa Rica, and in addition, had done their homework. The economic development team in Costa Rica was prepared, was polished, and knew its information. On the negative side for Costa Rica, research revealed that there was a lack of mid-level technicians who were going to be required to assemble Intel's products in Costa Rica. In addition, there were a lack of flights in and out of Costa Rica from major cities throughout the world where many of Intel's employees and executives were located. For Brazil, the positives were that they had a significant supply and quality of mid-level technicians and other laborers that were going to be required in the plant. And then on the negative side, the economic development team, in sharp contrast to that of Costa Rica, demonstrated a relative indifference to the concerns of Intel. They had not done their homework, and they kind of conveyed an attitude of take it or leave it. Given that Brazil had a lot of interest from other foreign investors, Intel and its executives did not feel like they were a priority for the Brazilian economic development team. In Chile, there were very favorable investment laws for foreign investors. We'll get to this a little bit later, but the focus was the laws that were dictated entry levels and accessibility for foreign investors were favorable. However, Chile did have a history of implementing capital controls against foreign countries. Capital controls, which we'll get into later as well, are essentially controls implemented by the central bank in host countries that prevent companies from getting their money out of the country. And finally, Mexico, their economic development team, like Costa Rica's, was prepared, had demonstrated a strong interest in having Intel come to their country, and they also had a good track record of managing and dealing with foreign investors and a lack of capital controls. However, on the negative side for Mexico was a law that required foreign investors and all investors to honor the requests of its employees to build and establish unions. This is a very, very big worry for many foreign investors and was an initial hang-up for Intel. However, the strong interests of both the Costa Rican and the Mexican economic development teams were enough to reduce the list from 4 to 2, as Costa Rica and Mexico made the final round. As negotiations and discussions move forward, Mexico's host government, in an attempt to assuage the concerns of the Intel executives and site selection team, said that it would absolutely provide an exception to the labor law rule, requiring companies to honor the requests of its employees to establish a union. This, while comforting in the short term, signaled a big red flag for Intel in the medium and long term. Because what it signaled was that Mexico's host government was open to the idea of giving exceptions and did not have a transparent and stable legal and regulatory framework. Only where a host government has the commitment to not giving exceptions to foreign investors, or any investors for that matter, can a host government establish and maintain a very stable legal and regulatory framework. Over time, this was something that Intel was going to want, and that the fact that they were demonstrated the willingness to make the exception was enough to pull Costa Rica out of the fore to win the project with its political and economic stability and strong interest demonstrated by the economic development team. Hi, my name's Rob Ginsberg, and I've been invited to speak to you by folks at ProColumbia, and I'm honored to be here today. I am talking to you about foreign direct investment, economic development agencies, and political risk. All of these topics are very paramount in today's discussion of foreign direct investment attraction from companies around the world. A very short biography, and give a little bit about my background. I come at this topic and this project from a multidisciplinary approach. What do I mean by a multidisciplinary approach? My background is in international relations, international political economy, international business. I'm a lawyer who's worked on disputes arising out of bilateral and multilateral investment treaties, worked as a political risk insurance analyst and underwriter, and I've worked for host governments in the United States trying to attract investment from foreign countries to respective states in the United States. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to go back between slides of the presentation and this shot, and hopefully after the conversation or after the discussion is over, you can ask questions via your contacts at ProColumbia. I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope that moving forward, if we ever have future engagements, that we can be more interactive. So here's a roadmap of where we're going to go. The first thing we're going to talk about is foreign direct investment. What is the context? I'm just going to provide a few statistics so that we understand the exact numbers and scale and scope of foreign direct investment that is generated throughout the world. Then we're going to really just talk about the basics of foreign direct investment. This is what's essential to understanding and developing any strategy that's nuanced and that is able to compete with some of the most cutting-edge economic development agencies around the world. Understanding the investor's perspective is simply a question of why do investors pursue foreign direct investment projects? What do they look at in order to make a decision on which country to go to? How does the company want to enter the foreign market? This is more of a legal question and a risk management question. And then finally is the why not, meaning we can look at the potential rewards of investments in foreign countries, but the risks are certainly a very relevant topic, and we can't look at the reward without identifying the risk and ways in which to manage it. Finally, after getting into the specifics of why not, we're going to demystify political risk, because that is one of the major concerns of foreign investors in foreign direct investments in emerging market countries and in countries throughout the world. So we're going to go through a short definition of political risk, talk about the specific types of loss, the cause of loss, the scenarios of loss, and then we're going to mention and identify the universe of options for managing these risks in the short, medium, and in the long term. Finally, I just wanted to re-emphasize that in that Intel case study, the main takeaways, the main drivers of the final decision were that the economic development team with Intel understood the client. They took a lot of interest in catering to the interests and the nuances and the needs of Intel, and the Costa Rican economic development team really, really demonstrated a strong interest. Finally, the other point was that Costa Rica demonstrated to Intel that it need not have significant concerns about the investment climate. What I mean by the investment climate is that the risks associated with going into Costa Rica were minimal. They projected a notion of economic and political stability and a history of economic and political stability. And this, in combination with the first factor, was enough to win Costa Rica the project. So a couple of stats on foreign direct investment. Inward foreign direct investment flows to developing countries reached their highest level in 2014 at $681 billion, which represented a 2% raise from the previous year. Global FDI inflows to Latin America are projected to grow by 11% to $1.4 billion in 2015. This final statistic I find is very instructive. In 2014, more than 80% of investment policy measures were aimed to improve entry conditions and reduce restrictions for foreign investors. Why do I find this to be so telling? Well, as many of you might know, on an annual basis, host governments often try and tweak or modify their investment laws, those laws that grant access to foreign investors, in an effort to either encourage or discourage them from coming. In this past year, 2014, we found that 80% of the measures were really aimed at encouraging foreign investors to come and make investments in their country. This statistic just reinforces the importance and the value that host countries and their economic development agencies are placing on promoting foreign investment. Let's go over the primary players just so we're all on the same page and we are all using the same terminology. In the context of the Intel scenario, Intel was headquartered in the United States and was interested in making an investment, a foreign direct investment, in Costa Rica. So it initiated its investment in Costa Rica, and in that context, Costa Rica would be the host country. Where is the physical investment? Where is the plant going to be located? In that context, the multinational enterprise obviously was going to be Intel, and then the home country in that context would be the United States. The home country is where the parent company is incorporated or registered. These terms are going to be used throughout the conversation, so I felt it appropriate to identify them at the outset. What's perhaps the most important part of understanding foreign direct investment and how decisions are going to be played out is, why do companies and host governments and home governments allocate significant resources and time and energy in pursuing FDI projects? Their objectives are going to be different, but they're equally strong. The multinational enterprise will consider going to a country for a foreign direct investment project for three main reasons. One is the market share. That is, in going to Latin America, Intel was trying to capture potential clients and this growing and burgeoning middle classes in Central and South America. That requires market research, but for the purposes of this discussion, we are focusing on the fact that the multinational enterprise wants to build consumers in this region. Finally, another reason is the efficiency of the supply chain. Now, while the efficiency of the supply chain is finding quality but less expensive labor, perhaps, in other countries to diversify the supply chain and also to make the shipments from the plant to the destination cost less and move quicker. So the efficiency of the supply chain is the primary objective, rather than capturing additional market share in this scenario. Also, natural resources is a third reason. As we all know, oil and gas, copper, silver, commodities all over the world are encouraging foreign companies to come to host countries, extract the natural resources, and then distribute them throughout the world. Commodities are very, very valuable, as we all know. Finally, host governments, they are in the game for a different reason. They're trying to bring jobs to their country, which is obvious enough. They're trying to create technology transfer, meaning not only bringing the products of foreign governments to the host countries and countries surrounding them, but also bringing the human capital, the people that know how to operate that technology and assemble and manufacture the products, and train local employees in the host country on how to use and implement the technology. And finally, capital investment is the sheer financial investment into the country, where we talked about the $500 million project for Intel was a significant capital investment. And then we're going to look at the home governments. Why do home governments care about outbound foreign direct investment? The short answer is that many home governments are not interested in promoting outbound foreign direct investment. But in many other cases, home governments recognize the value because it enhances the country's global presence, global competitiveness, and obviously the global competitiveness of the company. This is a much more indirect, medium to long-term objective that many governments pursue, but many other governments do not. I know that China and Colombia also pursue outbound FDI initiatives, and you guys could probably speak to the value of it also. Finally, what does the multinational enterprise look at when it's making its decision of what country they want to locate in? Understanding the what can also be a very helpful tool for economic development agencies. So when we're looking at the primary variables, we're looking at workforce, logistics, market research, taxes, and investment climate. Workforce is self-explanatory, but more specifically, what a company will look at is not only availability and the cost of workers in their specific industries, but they're going to be looking at that availability at the immediate term and in the long term. Because with labor demands shifting and turnover being significant with employees and companies, what may be true at the year of the inception of the project may be significantly different years down the road. And many consulting companies these days have very sophisticated tools that help companies forecast the availability of employees over time. Now, next we'll move to the logistics piece. Logistics speaks to how easy and quick and cheap or expensive is it to move people and product into and out of the host country. So in Costa Rica's example, they wanted to understand what the infrastructure was like around Costa Rica and in Costa Rica for delivering their people and their products to the Latin American market. Market research is finally the third example. As briefly mentioned before, market research is an objective and initiative that's taken on by host governments who are trying to capture market share in the host country. So in the event that a company was going to Costa Rica to sell their product to consumers in Costa Rica, then they would be more interested in doing sophisticated analysis of the markets in Costa Rica and identifying potential opportunities therein. Taxes is self-explanatory, but from the perspective of a foreign investor, there are certain taxes that will be more relevant than others. For example, in the United States and in many other countries, the corporate tax rate is something that's charged on all companies. And so a foreign investor might be more interested in understanding that specific tax than other taxes that might be more relevant to individuals in the host country and people that live in the country. Finally, investment climate is really getting to what are the political, economic, social, legal, regulatory risks associated with doing business in the host country. This is really of primary importance too, and we'll get into that more. Another question, after exploring the variables that companies consider, is how do companies enter into foreign markets? What is their investment vehicle is another way to explain it. And a lot of this is a function of what is the risk confronted by foreign companies and what method of entry will most effectively shield their risk. So a wholly owned subsidiary is an example of where a parent company sets up a wholly owned subsidiary in a host country and wants to have complete control over the investment and the ongoing day-to-day responsibilities of the employees in that subsidiary. So the parent company in a wholly owned subsidiary will often control the day-to-day procedures. In the event that a company who is entering a foreign country is worried about risks confronted by host governments or from host governments, they can pick a joint venture. A joint venture is simply a partnership between the parent company and a local company that's interested in this, is in the same industry and has very good synergy with the foreign partner. The joint venture is meant to minimize the risk of host government intervention because it discourages host governments from obstructing or interfering with the investment of a local company. The theory is that a wholly owned subsidiary that doesn't have the kind of connections and the kind of influence and the kind of presence in the host country that a local company will be more exposed to this risk. There's other examples, but just so you know, the method of entry is essentially a way of a strategic approach to entering a country. And the key determinants are risk and how does the parent company want to oversee or control, and the extent to which they want to control what the day-to-day operations are in the host country. Now, what's very important in understanding foreign direct investment and the role of economic development agencies is that all of these factors are dynamic. What do I mean by dynamic? Essentially, we can't consider the reasons why a company goes into a foreign country in a silo. We can't consider it exclusive of what they're looking at. We can't look at why they aren't going into a country independent of how they go into a country. My point is, though the answers to why they're going into a country will ultimately impact the answers to what they're going to look at in that country. And then finally, the factors of why not will impact the how. So if, for example, in the Intel scenario, we found that Intel's primary objective in going to Costa Rica was not to capture market share in Costa Rica, but was to enhance the efficiency of its supply chain and have a location in Central America that would enable them to distribute their product. So while they might have been interested in doing market research in other parts of Central and South America to which they were going to sell their product, their primary answer to what was distribution and logistics and labor, because the country in which they established their manufacturing facility was not going to be a country where they were going to be selling their products. Essentially, they were going to be distributing, and that's how the why influences the what. Another example of how dynamic these variables are is the why not. The investment climate risk will ultimately determine or contribute to the answer of how a company will enter a foreign market. If upon initial review, the investment climate risk exposure is minimal, then the country will be more likely to pick an entry vehicle that authorizes control from the parent country, meaning an investment climate risk that is low will encourage companies to have a wholly owned subsidiary and not have to worry about finding a local partner to shield itself from domestic risk in the host country. However, if the investment climate risk revealed that the likelihood of host government intervention was significant, then the company might be more compelled to find a joint venture or use another strategy like a franchise to insulate itself from all that risk. Now, we've talked about the investment climate. I want to delve deeper into what are the primary concerns of foreign investors. Now, it varies from foreign investor to foreign investor. It varies from host country to host country. It varies from home country to home country. But the overwhelming amount of research and evidence suggests that executives of multinational companies who are entering foreign markets are primarily concerned with two things. Their primary fear is political risk, and then their other fear is the ability to comply with regulations both coming from the home country and the host country. So we're going to take a little break right now, and I'll come back shortly. But the point is we're going to move forward so that we can identify with more sophistication and nuance what the risk exposures are from a political risk perspective. And the identifying and understanding that helps economic development agencies understand ways in which to mitigate that risk and to persuade foreign investors that there are ways to manage it and there are ways to deter it. We'll be back shortly. Thank you for your time.